Let's talk about the knee joint. If your knees are active and you're not hypermobile, you are going to have an amount of joint capsular support as well as ligamentous support that will keep your joint stable while you're standing on it, walking on it, whatnot, while you're weight bearing. If you are someone that is hypermobile, your capsular aspect of your joint and the ligaments are going to have more laxity to them or more give, depending on your collagen situation. And because of that, as you go to walk, your joint has less inherent baseline stability. So your joint limits of your ligament and your capsule, they're there to prevent your bones from moving in space. So they don't want your tibia to move too far away from your femur because then you will dislocate. If you are hypermobile, your laxity there is going to occur. Your brain is super smart and typically is aware of some of this. And so will create a baseline tone of your muscles, which may feel more like tightness to stabilize that. And so that will typically be happening for people ongoing if they're hypermobile, that they will have this inherent lower baseline tone of having to brace their muscles that might not be conscious.
Welcome to the Elevate Your Ride podcast, where rider performance is taken to the next level through conversation and education. Our episodes range from rider health to horse training to the stories behind successful amateurs and more. I'm your host, Ellie, personal trainer for equestrians. Thanks for tuning in. Today on the podcast, I'm bringing on Dr. Michelle Correa of Stable Body Physical Therapy. And this is the third time that I've brought Michelle on the podcast.
The third time.
Third time, yeah. Thanks for coming back.
No problem.
So we brought Michelle on episode 34, where we talked about your work as a physical therapist for equestrians. And then I brought you back on episode 102, where we talked about equestrian strength training. So we talked about like your findings and some data about like strength assessments, like where most equestrians are weak in general and where they're naturally strong. So that was a really interesting episode. But today we're going to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is hypermobility. So hypermobility itself is not a new phenomenon, but it's trending on social media. I feel like a ton of people are posting about it. People are getting more educated about it, and people are starting to realize, oh, I might be hypermobile. Like, I feel like in the past, people just thought it as you're super flexible. You can bend over and touch your toes with no problem, or you can do all these crazy stretches. And it's so much more than that. So that's what I want to talk about today is hypermobility, and specifically being hypermobile as an equestrian.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you for having me. I'm excited to be back and to chat. And we're going to talk about a deep dive on a pathology today. So we get to talk about hypermobility syndrome. I will preface it that while I am a physical therapist and I've treated quite a few athletes, equestrians and non-equestrians and non-athletes with hypermobility along that spectrum, I'm not a specialist in it, but there are people that have some like focus practice just on that. But there are not very many physical therapists that specialize in equestrians. And so I'm happy to provide my context for what I've seen in my population that I've worked with, but also from the sport perspective and how it can affect and impact equestrians and like what to do about it. Because there's a lot of confusing information.
yes.
I think it's such a good thing that we have social media to be able to connect with people who have similar injuries or histories or medical complications. And so that we can learn about other athletes and what they are dealing with, but also get to find out more information about maybe what's going on in your own body. But I think it also can lead to some confusion too on like, what do you do with that information?
Yes. So can you first talk about what hypermobility even is?
Yeah, so hypermobility is a term that's typically called about like a joint. You have some people talk about like, I have double jointedness or whatnot. Hypermobility as a full spectrum from like a hypermobility spectrum disorder is typically found where people have joints that are more mobile than they should be at normal baseline or more normal than average. That can be where a person has pain related to it. So it can be symptomatic or non-symptomatic. There's also a couple different types of presentations where you can have it happen like for your whole body. You could also have hypermobility to just your limbs, like hands and feet. You can also have it specific to a joint. So like you can have a joint if it's had an injury, like a ligament injury at baseline, like maybe you were a soccer athlete and you had an MCL injury or a ligament injury. You can have that joint be more mobile than your other joint. and it can be locally hypermobile. But if we're talking about full hypermobility as a diagnosis, you typically will see hypermobility as like a spectrum. It used to be EDS or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome versus hypermobility generally, and it's kind of been shifted over the last couple years to be a fully encompassed spectrum. So we have the hypermobility spectrum on how it impacts people, and that will be a variety of ways that connective tissue involvement is impacting their daily function. So people with hypermobility generally can have connective tissue challenges where they have maybe irritable bowel, or they have pelvic floor changes, or they get headaches, or they get pain in multiple joints. And then you can have people with hypermobility that maybe just have pretty limited symptoms from it, where they notice that, oh, I'm double jointed in that area, or my hands are really mobile, where they won't affect their whole system that much, but you can have it be systemic. If we're talking about like the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes or the different types of connective tissue disorders, that's another aspect of people will have a true connective tissue or collagen disorder. And there's in like the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome bubble, which is a diagnosis of hypermobility, but it has like a more broad encompassing term. There's like 13 different types of diagnoses that can come from that. And so each has their own like diagnostic process as well.
How does one going about knowing if they're hypermobile or not?
Yes. I mean, I think a lot of people will feel like they're really flexible, like they've been told they're really flexible, or they have had history of being flexible. Dislocations are really common, especially when they're younger. You'll dislocate an elbow, a kneecap. It can happen also as you're older too, but our collagens will kind of stiffen up naturally. And if you are already mobile and you get a little bit stiffer as you get older, then it helps you feel like you don't have as much of hypermobility. But people will often notice that they either have a lot of ongoing pain in multiple regions, or they have maybe some balance impact, but they can't quite pin down like a true reason why that's there. The process for being diagnosed in the hypermobility spectrum is kind of a tricky world right now. Most of the time, people with EDS can be diagnosed when they're young. There's like a pediatric process for EDS. There's now growing information on how people with EDS can be diagnosed as adults, but it's a lengthy process typically to rule out other things that could be causing it. So often hypermobility can be a diagnosis with another diagnosis. So people with autoimmune disorders, there's some hormonal disorders as well that can be involved in hypermobility. And so most of the time, primary care will try to make sure, okay, is it truly just hypermobility, or is there something that's also in conjunction with that? And so that process typically looks like you go to your primary care and you say, hey, I'm concerned about some hypermobility, or I've had this history of dislocation. And then from there, your primary care will probably take notes of your symptoms and see if there's any other additional things that would be needed to rule in or rule out that type of thing. Sometimes you will see that process happen through primary care. Sometimes they'll refer to like an autoimmune specialist or a rheumatologist for that. There's a Brighton score criteria. It's spelled like Beighton, right? Brighton, I think is how you say it.
Something.
But there's a scoring system, and you can look that up online, and it's basically several different movements on whether you would score and rank on being more likely to be hypermobile. And that's something you can also bring into your primary care and say, hey, I've scored this on the Brighton scale, and it's typically looking at like, do you hyperextend your knees? Can you touch your thumb to your forearm? Can you touch your pinky to your forearm? And so it shows you just the different positions and then how you would rate on that. And then you can bring that into your primary care, because that also will give them more data on like multi-joint pathology.
Is it normal to, or even possible to be, like, let's say someone felt like they were hypermobile in their knees. Is it normal or possible to have it just be on one, or is it typically on both joints?
It's dependent on if you are within the hypermobility disorder versus hypermobile overall. So if you have, like I have seen people that have had a lot of ankle sprains, like they've sprained their ankle a ton. And so they'll roll their ankle very easily because their ligaments are now lax in that joint. So you can have that happen to where this joint is now hypermobile, but it doesn't mean any of the other joints in the body are impacted. They've just had a lot of trauma to that joint. And so it's more likely to be localized to one if it's not a true hypermobility disorder.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
So it can be something that's kind of developed over time?
So you can have hypermobility disorder, which is
Mhm.
more like a collagen
Mhm.
challenge or like a collagen disruption, or you can have this hypermobility as a descriptor.
Mhm.
So that ankle sprain example where you've sprained the ankle a dozen times and you've stretched the ligaments.
Mhm.
If you go into a physical therapist and they look at your joint range, it's probably going to be excessive
Yeah.
because you've
Yeah.
now moved all the ligaments.
Right.
That doesn't mean the rest of the body is impacted by the
Yeah.
hypermobility, so you're not going to get this like global systemic impact.
Mhm.
So you can get it to that joint, and then that joint is considered hypermobile, or you end up on that spectrum, which is
Mhm.
typically more of a long-term, long-standing
Yeah.
chronic thing where you have some joints. So we have a couple different types where you can be generally very mobile. You also can have it be just hands and feet. You can also have it be localized to areas to where you're feeling like you're hypermobile in certain areas, but not the full body. So you can have it be a little bit more localized, like hands and feet,
Mhm.
which would be like, okay, my elbows aren't hypermobile, but my like wrists and fingers are,
Mhm.
and my hand or my feet might be. And so there is a lot of different criterions that can evolve too, but hypermobility can be a descriptor, but it also can be a disorder.
Yeah, it's, like, kinda complicated.
It's complicated.
Yeah, yeah, like, it's not super straightforward. So,
Mhm.
how often are you seeing clients that are hypermobile? I
Yeah.
I feel like it's more common than people realize.
I mean, I think people are getting more knowledge around it.
Mhm.
I also think that they're more aware of it being potential diagnoses. And so sometimes I'll see it where people talk about it that they're really hypermobile around a certain part of their body, but it's like the ankle sprain example where it's like
Mhm.
that part is more mobile,
Mhm.
but the rest of your body doesn't have this full systemic response. And
Right.
it's something that's been just going on since the ankle sprain. It hasn't been something that's been global. And so it's it is a complicated process, and I really want to like make sure that we're educating people on how to go about the process properly because I find that even like a lot of different diagnoses realms, people will come into me for physical therapy and say, I have this knee pain, it's this specific pathology. And then we go into the exam and it's not necessarily that pathology. And so it's social media can be good and hard in a lot of ways. I worked at a clinic when I was in traditional med, working in physical therapy, still sports specific, but we had a population there that was seeing us here in Portland for hypermobility, and they were along the EDS population, and so a lot of individuals with EDS, and so I would say 25% of my caseload was in that population, which is a pretty decent group of people.
It is.
And so we got referrals from some local providers that were managing and diagnosing people through that process. And so that was definitely informative. I would say now when I'm working with athletes and riders, exclusively riders, I would say it's probably less than 10% of the population that I work with riders, but I definitely have experience from my previous clinical to like
Mhm.
know what to add and not add and what would be
Mhm.
helpful for them. But it's complicated with that rider population because they typically don't have primary care on board often. And they want to know if something truly is a diagnosis. And it's hard because this is a trickier pathology to find out. It's a rule out of a lot of different things.
Mhm. Mhm. Let's talk about how being hypermobile impacts daily life, overall athleticism, ability to ride a horse. What do you notice in the people that you work with? What are
Yeah.
the challenges they struggle with? That sort of stuff.
Yeah. As we go into this podcast talking more about like hypermobility, we'll talk about that as along that hypermobility disorder spectrum. So it'll be including of EDS as well. So it's not that example of like the just local joint. It'll be like we're talking more of the systemic part of it. I would say that for a lot of riders, we are in a sport where we don't have a ton of heavy resistance that we're using in our sport. We have the horse that we're riding, we're balancing on them. We're not holding a lot of weight. We're not pushing our bodies off the ground like you would if you were in football. You're getting yourself up off the ground, you're pushing and moving a lot of weight if you're on the front line. But your riding requirements are typically body weight. You're
Mhm.
typically some people can have heavier handed horses for sure, where you have more weight in your hands, but you're not typically doing ton of poundage. The goal is to have light hands and be there and cue the horse with the least amount of force possible. Because of that, we are on a moving object we are trying to be as balanced and stable on. And if your body and balance is impacted, it will greatly affect your job as the rider. So it tends to be pretty impactful for riders until they are aware of how to impact their system the best. Typically, horses are requiring your balance to be really stable and aware, and you have to be able to coordinate your brain to tell your right leg to move back slightly and add leg cue around a turn. And the timing part is important, and your balance during that is important. And for people with hypermobility, they typically lack some amount of proprioception or their body awareness, and they typically lack a little bit of that timing. So they might think that they're putting their leg on, but it might be just a hair forward than they want it to be. And so their accuracy goes down a little bit. And that can be frustrating for rider and for trainer too, because the rider is not getting their body to do the thing they think is happening, or they might think it's happening, but they're not cueing the horse the proper way.
Yeah.
And trainer doesn't know quite how to change that for them effectively. And so it can be challenging for riders from a coordination standpoint, from a performance standpoint, but also people with hypermobility tend to have ongoing pain. And so they tend to have some baseline pain or dysfunction that way. And so does it affect them in the saddle? Yes, it affects their timing and their cueing and their discomfort potentially, but it also affects them in the other things that go along with horse training and riding, which is the packing the tack boxes and mucking out a stall and those additional tasks that put more load on your body that are still not like heavily weighted, but it's a long endurance game. And that can be fatiguing.
Yes. So for anybody else that's hypermobile that's listening to that and you're like, me, that's me.
Yes.
Like, I feel like listening to that, I was like, I relate to a lot of the things that you're saying. Are you always hearing, roll your shoulders back, push your heels down, add more leg, but you don't feel like you can? These cues will feel like a constant fight if your mind and body has not developed the proper connection, coordination, mobility, stability, and strength required. At Lope Down the Rail Fitness, I create customized workout plans for riders so you can become a stronger athlete for your horse. If you're ready to ride more effectively, visit my website, lopeanddowntherailfitness.com, linked in the show notes of this episode, and start training with purpose to elevate your ride. So when I'm riding, I would say that when I'm working out in the gym, I've got pretty good proprioception and I'm able to, I know where my body is in space. I know where the things are in relation to me. And when I'm riding, I have good like peripheral vision. So I'm able to know where my body is in relation to like Kone or like the center and that sort of stuff. But I don't necessarily know like where exactly my foot is or how much pressure is in my seat or if I'm getting really tense somewhere. Like it just, I feel like when I watch me ride versus other people ride who are similar fitness level, similar skill level, that sort of stuff, I feel like I'm working 10 times harder than they are to accomplish the same task.
Yeah.
So like when I am about to go around a corner, I'm thinking about that corner 10, 15 strides back. And I'm thinking, okay, I need this amount of weight in each seat bone and I need it to be pretty even. And I need this amount of weight in my feet. And I need to engage my core muscles to be prepared to go around the turn. And when I go around the turn, I can't drop my right shoulder. I just feel like there's so many things that I'm focusing on that it's challenging. And I just feel like I have to work so hard to get my body to do what I want it to do. And so much of the time, it just feels like no matter how much I try, no matter what I do, like it just does not perform the way that I want it to. And the older I get and the more that I observe other people ride and my clients and that sort of stuff, I tend to notice a lot of those same things with other people who are hypermobile. And I'd never thought of it like that until, I don't know, maybe within the last 6 months.
Yeah.
I was like, is it part of my hypermobility as to why I'm struggling with some of these things so much? And when you were mentioning about endurance earlier, I feel like, again, same compared to other people with similar fitness levels, similar days at the horse show, that sort of stuff, I feel like I get way more fatigued than somebody of, similar.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating.
It's
So,
the challenge of the endurance component for people that are hypermobile is, okay, if we're talking down to like the actual joint level, and
mhm,
let's talk about the knee joint. If your knees are active and you're not hypermobile, you are going to have an amount of joint capsular support as well as ligamentous support that will keep your joint stable while you're standing on it, walking on it, whatnot,
mhm,
while you're weight bearing. If you are someone that is hypermobile, your capsular aspect of your joint and the ligaments are going to have more laxity to them or more give, depending on your collagen situation. And because of that, as you go to walk, your joint has less inherent baseline stability. So your joint limits of your ligament and your capsule, they're there to prevent your bones from moving in space. So they don't want your tibia to move too far away from your femur because then you will dislocate. If you are hypermobile, your laxity there is going to occur. Your brain is super smart and typically is aware of some of this. And so will create a baseline tone of your muscles, which may feel more like tightness to stabilize that.
mhm.
And so that will typically be happening for people ongoing if they're hypermobile, that they will have this inherent lower baseline tone of having to brace their muscles that might
Mhm.
not be conscious. And that tends to be what fatigues people out.
Yeah. So that's something that I wanted to talk about is when you're hypermobile, like I feel like around some of my joints. So typically where I feel it the most is my knees, my hips, my elbows, and then sometimes my shoulders. I
Mhm.
don't notice it as much in my shoulders. I would say my knees and my hips are probably where I feel it the most prominent and where it impacts me the most in the saddle.
Yeah.
It can be whether I'm walking, whether I'm working out, whether I'm riding, it doesn't really matter what area I'm in. I feel like I have to be so conscious of the position that my joints are in. And I feel so tight from using those muscles to hold that joint in its position, but then so loose at the same time
Yeah.
because that joint itself is unstable. It's
Yeah.
like my muscles are working overtime to try to stabilize
Yeah.
it. And so, can you explain more, like how you can feel like so tight but
Mhm.
so loose at the same time?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think a lot of people that have hypermobility will feel like really tight in certain muscles, but
Mhm.
not in others.
Mhm.
If we're talking about a tight muscle, typically physiologically, we classify a tight muscle as a shortened muscle.
Yes.
People will feel like the muscle is tight, but if you're hypermobile, you're not going to be shortened by any means. And so that means that you're going to have the sensation of the tightness, but it's not actually shortened muscle.
Mhm.
So you're feeling this sensation likely because of that baseline tone where your muscle has been holding a position for your joint so that it's stabilized or maintains integrity of the joint.
Mhm.
And that can be where you feel like overall fatigued, but man, you could touch your toes to the ground
Mhm.
or you could still stretch your arm to stretch your pec out, but you're probably not going to feel the pec stretch until you're about to dislocate your shoulder.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting because people will often do if they feel really tight and they're someone that's hypermobile, they'll want to stretch to get that like stretch feel good response. But
Mhm.
if you're so mobile that you're stretching, you're just cranking on your joint more
Mhm.
and you don't get the actual relief because the soft tissue was never shortened in the first place.
Mhm.
It's just this like inherent feedback of like feeling really tight. And so that's where it's challenging because you're fatigued and your muscles feel tight, but the stretching doesn't help.
Mhm.
And that is such a tricky place to be in if you're not sure what the heck is going on because
Mhm.
it often for people that I work with that are hypermobile, like we're not stretching. We don't need to stretch. They might feel like their pecs are really tight. Like, great. I'm going to tell you they're not actually shortened. We can look at it and I'll show them like the range of motion.
Mhm.
Looks awesome. We don't need to stretch this. We actually probably need to work on improving its tolerance to the positions that you have. So sometimes that's strengthening certain
Mhm.
muscles, sometimes it's strengthening other muscles.
Mhm.
And I would think that it is challenging in a sport where we don't often cross train to figure out how to overcome some of that because
Mhm.
so much of that can be improved with strength training.
Mhm.
And I find that a lot of riders that have that, it's kind of this challenge of they feel like crap because they've been trying to stretch out their hamstrings for a decade
Mhm.
and they ride when they feel like their hamstrings are really sore, but they never really get that like development of more strength in their hamstrings
Mhm.
that strength training can give them. So then their baseline activity is like still their max. if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to get into like, what do you do about it?
Mhm.
So hypermobility is not necessarily something that like I learned about from like my personal training certification.
Yeah.
So like I've always kind of known that like I, I always kind of knew that I felt more mobile in some certain areas, but I didn't really necessarily know what it was
Mhm.
until more recently.
Yeah.
And so when I would be in the gym and working out, I just felt so unstable all the time that when
Mhm.
I got certified, I'm like, oh, when you're unstable, you need to train for stability.
Yeah.
So then I did a ton of stability training for like ever and ever and ever. And I just felt like no matter what I did, it just was not helping the actual stability around my joints.
Yeah.
And then I just got more frustrated because I'm like, I feel like no matter what I do, it's just not getting more stable. Like, am I doing the wrong exercises? Do I not have enough load? Like, what's the problem? And so around the time that I was kind of like getting really frustrated with all this, I was also having a lot of back pain.
Mhm.
And this was about a year ago. Well, maybe not quite a year, but I came to you and I was like, Michelle, like I am having way more back pain than I should. And I don't know, I can't, I feel like my back pain and my hypermobility are not, like they're two separate things, but they're
Mhm.
probably connected to each other as well.
It's
Like,
all connected, right?
it's all
It's
connected.
all
Like
connected.
I want, like I before my back injury happened 6 years ago, I was still struggling with chronic back pain. The injury that I had just made it way worse.
Yeah.
So connected, but not. So anyway, I was having a bunch of pain, and I came to and I was like, what do I do? Like I should not have pain getting out of bed. I should not have pain putting on a pair of socks. Like this is not what I would like to have. And we're like, well, what are you doing in your workouts? I'm like, well, I'm doing pretty light resistance training at the moment because I don't want to make it worse. And I was not very strong objectively.
Objectively. Yep. So
And
strength assessment.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And you said, I would rather you be strong and hurt than be weak and hurt. And I was like I'd never thought of it like that. So then I stopped being a little baby about the heavier weights and I started picking them up a lot more and just saying, you know what, like she's right. Like let's see what happens when I start lifting heavier. So granted, around the same time I started lifting heavier, I also changed some other things. I stopped eating added sugar, completely cut it out of my diet for like 6 months.
Mhm.
And then I also got a sauna. And I
Yeah.
started using it like 2 or 3 times a week. There was multiple factors going on at the same time. And I feel like it was the combination of all of them
Mhm.
that brought me to where I am today, where I couldn't tell you the last time my back hurt from like a daily life activity.
That's amazing.
And that's how it should be, right? Like I would expect my back to be sore after loading a horse trailer
Right.
or after being at a horse
Totally.
show for a weekend, but not from rolling out of bed.
Right.
It's like that's kind of ridiculous. I'm 26 years old.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I noticed when I started, so I stopped doing as much stability training, started doing more traditional strength training
Mhm.
movements again. And what I noticed is I actually feel like my hypermobility symptoms have improved
Mhm.
since I started doing more traditional strength training
Yeah.
and stopped chasing stability training so much. So let's talk about that. Why?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, first, I should preface for context for your clients, like
Mhm.
you and I had already discussed all of the findings in your MRI
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Like we had already discussed that, like, if I'm dealing with a client who's presents to me with pain, and that's not my first go-to. That was after long plan of
Yes,
assessment.
but we'd worked together for how many years before we got
I
to
just
that
wanted to
point?
give a little
That's
context
a good
so that
point.
people
Yes.
weren't like, she wants people to be in pain and strong. No.
For me,
For you
specifically.
specifically, yeah, it is such a challenging thing because for people that are hypermobile or have some baseline weakness and you have a pain somewhere that's been, you've tried all the things, you've adjusted your program appropriately, then what was kind of left for you was like, well, what if you're stronger? What happens? Like, I know it
Yeah.
feels not great, but a lot of
Yeah.
people don't want to go down that avenue because they don't want to go push their strength training because they've been uncomfortable, unstable, haven't gotten better with this exercise. So why would we progress more weight? Sometimes that
Yes.
is the answer of
Yes.
like, why don't you push your weight strength stuff and see if it gets better? And if it does, that gives us more information.
Well, and one of the reasons why I didn't want to go heavier, why I'd kind of went away from the more traditional heavier strength training is because I didn't feel stable around my joints. Like I was like,
Yeah.
I don't feel stable.
Mhm.
How can I do these movements if I feel like my joints are falling out like a wet noodle?
Yes. And so it is the research on hypermobility and strength training is amazing
Mhm.
because this is not just a push of strength training. I swear I won't go always on your podcast and be like strength. I mean, the strength training is great. I love it. And a progressive overload is like the bread and butter of what good rehab and good strength training is.
Mhm.
It is really valuable for this population because if you're trying to get a client to improve the way that their movement pattern looks and they are hypermobile, that movement pattern may always look kind of weird.
Mhm.
It may always look a little unstable. Their
Mhm.
balance might always be slightly impaired. They can
Mhm.
improve to a degree, but they're not going to feel the body awareness improvement necessarily. Even if the movement does improve, they may still feel unstable because
Mhm.
that's how their body interprets information. And so this is a population that having that diagnosis really helps because you go, okay, well, you are more mobile in these joints. They're going to feel unstable. It doesn't mean you're actually unstable.
Mhm.
Form is super important. So
Mhm.
if I have someone that has hypermobility and we're working on a shoulder issue, if they position their shoulder into a position that might dislocate it, like tricep dips, then it might be something we don't want to do that specific movement on.
Mhm.
We might want to do more weighted controlled things in a smaller range of motion, and
Mhm.
that's still fine. So a lot of times if people are doing an exercise and they want to get the most range of motion, I'm not really worried about that with people that are hypermobile. Like you're going to get all of the range of
Plenty.
motion.
Plenty. Yeah.
You're going to get plenty. So I almost want you to see if you can go within this smaller range
Mhm.
and do more weight in
Which,
a controlled position.
which as a hypermobile person is actually harder
Mhm.
because I notice this all the time, not necessarily with myself because I know enough not to
Mhm.
do this, but with my hypermobile clients who come to me that have never really worked out before, they don't know that when they hyperextend the joints in an unstable and vulnerable
Mhm.
position, so they push through that full
Yeah.
range of motion. And I watch it, I'm like, oh God,
Mhm.
don't do that.
Mhm.
So, and then to me, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on this. So, to me, if I push through a range of motion if I push to my hypermobile
Mhm.
range of motion,
Yeah,
like
you're
through my
looking.
knees in a squat, right? I feel like I'm locking out my joints and I'm using my knees for stability, the actual joint, instead of the muscles.
Yeah.
And so it teaches your muscle, it gives them an out and it teaches them that they can offload the pressure off of the muscles and into the joint. And so I find that happens with my hypermobile clients. And if I shorten the range of motion, their muscles fatigue
Mhm.
way faster and they're really not that strong. And it's because their body has gotten used to just offloading the body weight
Yeah.
into the joints.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's accurate?
So it is interesting because if you are extending the joint to its limit,
Huh?
which hypermobile people won't feel it's a limit until it's beyond its limit. You'll
Yeah.
be like, oh, that's a little stretchy. And you're like, your leg is completely hyper. So no. And it's like, yeah, it feels tight there. And it's like, well, now we are past the point of threshold for most people.
Yeah.
And it's not for anyone's fault. It's just the way that their brain interprets the extension. So if you're working on an extension movement at the end position, you're typically going to lose the activation of the quad.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just gonna hang out on joint, and then you're just loading
Yes.
the joint, and then your
Yes.
squats feel like crap to you physically because every time you squat, you go into that end range extension. So you're like, wow, my knee always hurts when I do that. Just hanging out in the end of your joint
Yes.
extension.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if you limit your range and say, okay, let's just go to like fully straight, and that
Mm-hmm.
may mean that the person's maybe feeling a resistance band behind their knee, or maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
watching it visually. That is how they can see it or they can feel it or give them some feedback because their brain is not going to give them the feedback until it's really extended.
Mm-hmm.
And that type of like using like a proprioceptive tool is
Mhm.
actually really helpful for this population.
Yes.
Whether it's using visual aids of like, look how far your shoulder is moving here. I only want you to go to a certain position before, even if you don't feel it necessarily, I'll put that in quotes, like you'll feel it, that people that are hypermobile are going to feel the things, but they're going to feel it at 125% of the range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're pushing to the feeling of activation, you're going to just chronically overload your joint. So we want to make sure that your range of motion and strength training is more of a controlled position, and it's in a way that you can either feel a resistance band stops you at a certain spot, or that you are feeling like you are pushing into the ground at a certain degree. So you want some sort of feedback that can be really helpful for people if they're not as body aware. And I find that helps a lot of different injuries, pathologies, medical issues as well, that sometimes we lose that body awareness, and it's super common with this population.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are the recommended things to do? So strength training.
Strength training is,
But are there like specific moves? Obviously avoiding anything that is going to hyperextend your joints.
a lot of times these people have been stretching for a decade and they've never felt any improvement in their stretch. And that's when I look at their tissue length and say, like, look, we don't need to stretch that because you are bending in half. And so I typically encourage people that are worried about being on the hypermobile spectrum, like, to try to strengthen things instead of stretch them to see if that helps from a discomfort standpoint, whatnot. Strength training is a really good option, but I also recommend doing a lot of self-pacing with this, because if you are going to the gym for the first time and you're concerned you have some hypermobility stuff, form is really important for this population. Form is important for a lot of populations, but for this one, like, your body awareness is not going to be 100%. And so you may think you're doing this perfect squat with a 25-pound kettlebell, but it might actually be overloading your joints with a 25-pound kettlebell. So it's not to say don't do weight, because we talked about low load is not necessarily the best either. But if you are newer to exercise, it's good to have guidance so that you have someone who's visually watching your form. So having a strength coach of some capacity to watch and help you get that baseline, and then to progressively build strength. So like you and I had talked about, that you were kind of managing your strength program with lower volume. We've kind of flipped the script and said, why don't we push the weight but have fewer days and more rest between? If people are along that like EDS spectrum where they have maybe a collagen disorder, having more rest days is important. Even more rest between sets is important, allowing those soft tissues to relax, but then allowing your body to have a little rest after your exercises where you're waiting maybe 2 days. Maybe you're only doing twice a week. That's totally fine. Maybe you start at once a week, but letting your body get used to that movement and it adapts appropriately. The bread and butter of progressive load really helps with riders that struggle with the endurance component of all of the lifting and the pushing and the pulling and the loading of things that we do as riders, and the horse care aspect of things, because our sport is so based on endurance muscles. And your endurance muscles are going to be muscles that are active during low load but long time. And so if you are working on those muscles at the gym and you're still doing really low volume, you're just going to fatigue them out more. So by having a baseline of like, I can do this amount of squats reps for body weight, know what you're like, if you're doing a hip hinge or a deadlift, know what that looks like for you weight wise. You can start really low, but you don't want to stay low at that weight forever. You want to make sure that you're developing a higher capacity for your muscles, which will absolutely be valuable for riders that are going to be doing a lot of work and endurance stuff, but then they'll also build their capacity for strength training fast, which is great because they can build and develop more strength development like at the gym where they're starting to push weight, but then they come to the barn and it now is at a lower demand for their muscles, which allows them to do more with less discomfort.
Yes.
And the research on strength training for people that are hypermobile, it's developing. There's not necessarily like a perfect protocol for it. There is guidelines for physical therapists. There's guidelines for strength coach, but it's kind of like start at a baseline, get your good information on how many squats someone could do, how many push-ups they can do, get a single leg balance on them. But you're going to want to improve strength over a longer period of time so that they can do more, just like you would any other athlete, but maybe with the modifications that they might need a little bit of visual support. They might need more banded exercise, not from a resistance standpoint, but because they need the feedback, where they might need different positions or cues. There's some additional diagnoses that come with hypermobility. So that's why it's important to have primary care on board, because while people can be hypermobile or on the EDS spectrum, there's often a dysautonomia, or like there can be cardiac or lightheadedness or blood pressure related things that are involved. And those can be exclusive to hypermobility, but they also can be other things like autoimmune disorders that have the bonus of a hypermobility diagnosis as well. And so for people that are hypermobile and have some of that like blood pressure, changing position challenges, that's where we end up managing positionally, not doing a ton of movements that change position. So that's where I will have athletes that do all exercises that are laying on their back, or they'll do all seated ones, or they'll do all standing ones. But we have maybe a series where, okay, you're going to do Monday, you're all laying flat. You're not going to do laying flat exercises and sitting up exercises. And that's for more of the people that have those additional diagnoses paired with the hypermobility, but that position changes can be impactful. So we try to monitor that as well.
Are you loving our content and are wondering how you can support your hosts? Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify for access to all our episodes ad-free. For $4.99 a month, you can help us bring you the quality content you need to elevate your ride. If you're interested in sponsoring an episode for your business, our packages start at $25 an episode and offer you a wide range of exposure to equestrians. Click the Sponsor Us link in the show notes to learn more. Do you notice that hypermobile clients progress slower than non-hypermobile clients?
From what metrics? In what way?
Form and ability to move load. So ability to progress weight over time, and then feeling like their form is improving as well.
Yeah, I think that you can visually see their form improve, but their body awareness of it, like they might not feel like it's improving. And so they might be apprehensive to change and progress. That is definitely a thing, because their body awareness, you can improve that. That can take time. It also might hit a limit too. So I like to have that objective other person, trainer, whatnot, that's doing check-ins to say, that looks pretty good, or we still need to be managing a smaller range of motion, or maybe a different variation. So I do think that's the component where like just their form can improve, but their feeling around the form might not, or vice versa. They might not be able to improve form, but they may feel like they're more stable,
Right.
or whatnot. And visually it might not look like that. So that like brain to body connection is very challenging. I think the other component of that is the actual strength development or power development, how they can strength train and improve strength. And that can be slower generally if you're dealing with like a true collagen disorder. On average, people with hypermobility, what most of the current data literature says, that they have a 30% deficit of strength compared to average population. And that's likely because of like the collagen, like the true fibers are just not able to activate as readily. And so there is a decrease in strength at baseline.
Yeah.
They can still improve strength. The data and research on how that line looks compared to like average pop, I have not seen that in the research yet. But my experience with that client base is that they will typically strength train and progress, and you can build and develop their strength. You can push the weight, but you want to make sure that form is good, and that form may take some time or tweaks, and that they typically will take a little bit more time before they're progressing further weights.
So I heard you talk about collagen a couple of times. So from the research that I've done, it doesn't seem like, because at first when you say, oh, like if there's a collagen deficiency, I bet people are listening to this going like, okay, I'm going on Amazon and I'm ordering collagen as a supplement. Can you explain why or why not that might help?
Yeah, so we also have to be aware that like it's a collagen defect, not a deficit. So it's not a lack of collagen, but it's a disruption in the type of collagen fibers developed. And so the research that like the EDS Foundation, I think it's Foundation, there's an EDS, looking at Ehlers-Danlos Society. That's what it is. The Ehlers-Danlos Society, they have globally said that the research has not shown increasing collagen orally increases or improves the hypermobility because it's a disruption of the collagen. Whereas when you are taking a supplement, you are going to break that down, the collagen down in your stomach. And so it's not currently recommended as a supplementation that would be helpful, unfortunately.
I know, unfortunately, yeah. Because from my research, it doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot you can do other than strength training and making sure that your form is good. Like, and it doesn't seem like doing a bunch of stretching is going to help
No
either.
stretching.
So it doesn't really seem, from what I can tell, there's something you can do like on a daily basis. Like, there's not like a magic pill. There's not a magic stretch. There's not a magic exercise. It just seems like something you learn to manage better and better over time.
Yep, and you kind of find things that are aggravating positions or aggravating movements or positions in the saddle where maybe if you're trying to do a certain movement in the tack, maybe you don't have that brain body awareness to be able to get your body to move in the way you need it to. And so maybe that is when you use additional things like resistance bands, or you use supportive physical therapists from the ground like me to be able to say, okay, that is doable, or let's see how we can get your body to find that position. Like I use sponges a lot because it gives some feedback and they're pretty safe to put with riders in saddle. And maybe that's where you have a different hand position that you have in the reins, or maybe that's where you're using a different type of stirrup for a little bit so you can get your angle of your leg a certain way. So having and being open to modifications. I mean, there are people that have hypermobility that will use braces to avoid like true dislocations of their fingers or their wrists or their elbows. And so there's like bracing things that people will use to help maintain the integrity of their body, because it will take, if we're talking about the joint, right? If your ligaments are more lax and your joint is more lax, you're relying on the muscles. And so if you're someone that's hypermobile and you need to be able to do certain things and it's uncomfortable for your body, things like braces are actually a really big thing that could be helpful. And there's like a bunch of finger braces and stuff you can find online that you can make them like cute little jewelry pieces too, like that people have developed for people along the EDS spectrum that can be improving of their joint pain because it helps stabilize it externally without their muscles having to do it. So that's a big thing, like having appropriate and comfortable bracing and knowing that like why you're using it. You're not using it because you sprained your ankle. You're using it because your ankle now has a ton of additional laxity to it that it needs more stability. Working with a medical provider, I'm a huge proponent for getting the additional comorbidities rechecked, because there are symptoms that can happen. There are symptoms that people will have in their body and their joints from a pain perspective that can be related to hormones, that can be related to imbalances of your full system that are a part of hypermobility. And those you can often have some semblance of additional treatments. So if you're someone that's on that hypermobile spectrum, seeing if there's anything else going on that may also help with those joint pain things or baseline pain that you have can be really helpful. Even if like you're getting blood work and you find out that maybe you need more baseline magnesium or vitamin D, or if you need more progesterone at different types of your cycle, like having the blood work baseline to know, okay, are we dealing with something that's autoimmune that does have a treatment pathway? Will that help with my joint pain? Will it help with my daily pain? Or is it truly just related to the hypermobility? And in that case, going down that strength training avenue, building and developing that stability as much as you can, but then knowing that there are some bracing options. But it is one of those things that doesn't have like a take this medication and you'll solve it type of thing.
Yeah. So I would say there's 3 main ways that I feel like I'm impacted by my joints and the lack of stability and the lack of support and the tightness when I ride. So the first one was what I described earlier, where I feel like I have to do so much preparation just to even do like a simple task, like going around a corner. And then the 2 other ways are, let's say I'm riding a horse that's maybe a little green, or maybe it's a little fresh, or maybe it's a little naughty. When I have my left hip on the outside, so when I'm riding on a track to the right, I feel unstable, even if the horse is being perfect. Like, I just feel like I can't call on my left hip to anchor down into the saddle and to keep me in the saddle. And so let's say that I'm on a left track and it's worse if I'm on like a circle. If I'm in a straight line, I'm better. But if I'm in a circle And let's say the horse wants to do something a little silly.
Okay.
I literally don't feel like I will stay in the saddle. Like, I feel like my joints will not hold me where I need to be. And it's something that I struggle with because then I get nervous when I ride. I'm like, well, what if the horse wants to do something silly? Like, I feel like I just can't anchor down and stay.
Yeah.
And I should have brought Savannah up here so she could talk about this with you too. So what happens is I just like, I feel like I can't hold on to the saddle like with my seat bones. When I'm riding to the left, the other way where my right hip is on the outside, it's fine. But so what will happen, like let's say the horse like wanted to buck or something like that. I will clamp down in an effort to stay stable.
Mm-hmm.
And Savannah will look at me and she's like, you gotta let go. And I'm like, I can't. Like, I literally feel like I'm gonna fall off. Like, I can't. And she's like, you're not gonna fall off. Like, I don't see you looking unstable. I'm like, but it feels that way. Like, it literally just feels like I can't call on my own body to hold myself down.
Yeah.
And that's been a challenge. And what's funny is she looks at me, she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you look fine.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a frustrating thing. And the stronger I get, the better it gets.
Yeah.
So for anybody else who struggles with that, what I've been doing is really, really strengthening like my hips and my hips not in a fixed position. So not just doing glute bridges, not just doing RDLs, working more on glute strength through different planes of motion.
Yep.
So the thing that has helped me the most, I think lately, I've been doing a lot of foam roller hurdle overs and foam roller hip airplanes.
Yeah.
And that has been the best thing I've ever done for like feeling like I can actually.
You're getting your movement through a single like position.
Yes. And that has been super, super helpful. So the more that I feel like I train like my glutes and my back and my core to like stabilize me through like different movements, not just in a fixed position, that helps a lot. And then the other thing, which is one of the main things I wanted to talk to you about today, I noticed this within myself and some of my other hypermobile clients. And not 100% of the time, but most of the time, I'll ask them, I'm like, how do you feel when you ride a pleasure horse, specifically at the lope? And I feel like when I ride a pleasure horse, it requires you to be loose for your body. And I feel like I cannot be loose enough and stable enough to hold my body in the position and hold the horse's body in a position to have proper movement. But then when I do loosen up, I get so unsteady that the horse and I like flop like a fish. And I feel like I cannot ride. I'm getting better at it. The stronger I get my glutes, same thing with the feeling unsteady and doing the airplanes and the hurdle overs. I feel like it gets better and better, but it just feels so hard to stay stable and push and be loose, like all in the same time.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't really have a question for what to do
like
about it. But like, or even why, like I know why. It's because I feel unsteady in my joints. It's just like, those are the ways that I notice that it impacts me when I ride. Do you notice other ways that people get impacted when they ride?
Yeah, I mean, I think the softness is tricky for a lot of people that are hypermobile. You have to be able to have a baseline of stability for your own body so you don't lose your joint integrity. But then you need to be able to soften enough for the horse. And so that, for a lot of people, requires you to be soft in certain areas. So instead of feeling like you have to soften your whole body, thinking about softening certain spots at a time can be helpful for people that are hypermobile.
Yeah.
I also think that like single leg work, like you're describing, where you're doing multi-directional plane is really great. I also think that plyometric work and working on like speed reactions is really helpful too. So where you're doing, and this is not like the first go around, like you're obviously an experienced exercise person, but like loading enough low volume plyos to where you're getting a little bit of power and push off will help with your ability to recruit your muscles when the horse is going to do something silly, because that's going to be quick reaction timing for you. And you want to be able to call those muscles and be able to respond appropriately.
Yeah. And they have a super slow response time.
Yeah.
Like super slow.
Yeah. And so that like plyometric work can be helpful for that. Like even just little like ladder drills to where you're just working on that. And doing like double leg squat jumps, those kind of things, but doing them like getting the power off the ground can be really helpful. So that's my 2 cents on that. But the other way that I see, if I'm seeing and working with like competitive jumpers. This is notorious for competitive jumpers that are hypermobiles. They will like slingshot out of attack on the back end of the fence, and they won't know what the heck to do for that. And it's where, you're jumping over fence, and as you land, the rider has to absorb all the motion, and they will become like a noodle in the wind. And it will feel like whiplash. They probably are getting true whiplash when they're landing every fence. But they typically come to me because they have neck pain on landing, or they have a horse that bucks every time they land because they can't land in their feet. And so it's interesting because the hypermobility makes it hard to know where your body is in space, and we're in a sport where your trainer's on the ground and they're telling you this is where I need you to be. And if you don't have the brain body connection where that should be, it makes your battle a lot harder to find that. And if you're like for your left side, when you're feeling like it's harder for that left hip, do you find that is your harder leg to balance on?
Oh, I can't do anything very well with my left leg. Like it feels like it's not it feels like my left leg belongs to another person. Like it doesn't do what I want it to do, like ever sometimes. It's really strange.
Sometimes
And that I think is partially because of my injury. My injury's on my lower left side. So I think there's like multiple things going on.
Yeah.
But I think part of it, like I don't think the hypermobility helps.
It has not helped.
It certainly has not helped. No.
So having and working on some single leg plyo work is beneficial. But I also do that for those jumpers too. When it's for those unexpected like horses moving, you have to find your space in. You have to land in a specific way, and you have to make sure that you're responding to stay in the tack. Having some sort of quicker motion can be really helpful. And I think people think about plyos as being like box jumps and stuff. It doesn't have to be. It can be
whatever you
modified as long as we're doing like quicker twitch response, which is something that we don't often train that much, but it's really valuable for riders.
You know what's so funny is, so I'm going to call out one of my clients out here. So I have a client and she has struggled with, she's not diagnosed as hypermobile, but I mean, there's
signs.
Sure. There's signs. And she was kind of having similar symptoms to me, where just feeling like unstable, has to work really hard to do simple tasks, that sort of stuff. And I felt like her reaction time was kind of slow and working really hard to stay. Like I felt like she was working too hard to do the simple things that I was asking.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? We've been training stability and strength for so long that I think that we have overdone it. And we just now need to teach your body how to move and how to move fluidly.
Yeah.
And so I gave her a plyometric workout. And she's been doing that for quite a few months now. And so like we do like the stabilization and the strength training and all of that sort of stuff. Then she has to do plyometrics once a week. And I give her things like a Pilates ball, and she has to like bounce the ball while she's doing a jump. Like I'm trying to teach her how to move quickly and be able to still be stable. Like, can you move out of your comfort position and get right back to it? Can you move out of it? Can you get right back to it? And I mean, we've been pretty happy with the results.
No, it's
from
exactly what that reaction time and having that additional support of the quicker reaction, but also like the cognitive brain power while you're doing that. Because we're doing that all the time in the tack when you're having to think about something and move your body and also stay on top of the horse at the time. Like those are complicated brain processes, and so the more challenging you can make it like that, the better.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people end up with like in the horse world that end up wanting to do additional cross training. Sometimes I see the like yoga and the Pilates world being brought up, which is a great world for sure. I'm always cautionary about it for people with hypermobility because the yoga is a lot of deep stretching, which is great, but we also know that your average hypermobile person is going to stretch 125% into positions, and then they're not necessarily going to feel the benefit of what you would be getting. So it's a lot of like, if you're going to be doing yoga, you want to be doing really like controlled. You're going to control your range of motion by 25% so you don't go into the depth of your joint. But it's also that yoga and the Pilates are typically not very weighted. You're going to be doing all body weight stuff. And so we talked earlier that like having a little bit of that muscle overload is beneficial for these people that are dealing with hypermobility because they're at a baseline fatigue.
Yeah.
We need to build their capacity up higher. And so if you go at baseline, you're already fatigued, and then you go on top of that to go to a class that's going to just do more body weight fatiguing and holds, that's also not going to be great for your system. So it's going to be harder. And it's obviously, it has its value in certain aspects, but it's not where I would recommend spending the most of your time. You want to be doing it for sure more strength training, and you can add and sprinkle some of that in, but it's going to probably be harder for those people because they're going to think throughout it, like, how do I not overextend or how do I not overstretch?
Are you ready to take your riding to the next level? Better performance starts with a mindset shift. How you think, train, and show up each day. Positive affirmations like small steps toward big goals, progress over perfection, and consistency builds confidence serve as powerful reminders to stay focused and committed. Check out our Elevate Your Ride affirmation merch, linked in the show notes, and add intention to your everyday routine.
How does being hypermobile impact posture?
Or does it?
It does. Oh, for sure. Hypermobility impacts posture quite notably because the like classic signs of hypermobility, one is the like extension or hyperextension of the knee. You can also get anterior tipping of the pelvis and then overextension of the low back. That can also create that upper part of your back getting a little bit more rounded and bringing your scapulas a little bit more forward. That is kind of the more baseline posture for people that have hypermobility. They often will feel tight in those areas that are being elongated. And so we know from the rest of this podcast so far that the tension and the tightness is not always correlating with it actually being shortened muscle. And so people will feel more globally fatigued because they're in those positions and elongating the muscles and feeling like their joints are really unstable. And so they need to have that baseline tone. And so it can just mean their baseline posture is fatiguing, but they'll find areas of lax or slack where they can. And so that's where that posture kind of comes from, is that you're hanging out on what muscles you can so that you're not overly fatiguing certain ones and you're over fatiguing the other ones. So it can impact posture. Posture is a challenging thing to change when you've moved one way for a very long time. For people that are hypermobile, having additional things to help with body awareness so that they can find more of a neutral position can be helpful. So I really personally like using K-tape for people that have that kind of postural change. Not from it's going to hold you in place, but it will give you the feedback that your brain is looking for. So a lot of times people will use K-tape just for the baseline feedback of like, okay, if you're feeling really unstable in your knee, put some tape on it. It does not have to be applied in a really specific scientific way. Like your brain needs the feedback. Doesn't matter how much stretch you have on it. You can put it with no stretch. And I will tell my clients and work on that with them that like, okay, this is where we're feeling the most amount of impact. It's because this joint is not feeling as stable. You're getting too much firing from other muscles. So why don't we put some tape on this or put tape along your like extensor of your spine just to give your brain a little bit of feedback there. So you don't have to be putting as much physical effort into it. And so stuff like that, plus the bracing and those things can be really helpful for offloading some of that postural, like baseline fatigue. So people that work on a computer or at a desk throughout their day, if they are constantly at a standing desk and they're extending their knee all the time, sometimes that's where we want to have some variations where they're not just standing or sitting. They're sitting cross-legged. They get to change position. Maybe they have a knee brace that's like a soft knee brace that they put on because their knee bothers them some days. That's where they get to use that intermittently. So it's finding areas and postures that are more appropriate for longevity, but that they also have some ways to manage around it. It's complicated.
It is. Can horses be hypermobile as well?
That's a good question. I think there is likely a spectrum of it. There's not a ton of information around it. I think there is a similar like EDS-esque or like collagen issue that you can get that is like most of the like Ehlers-Danlos, that collagen, just not, oh, now I'm going to double check myself. And not the collagen
Deficiency.
It's a deficit.
Deficit, not a deficiency.
Yeah, so it's a disruption of your collagen. If you're dealing with the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there's a similar-ish type that you can have diagnosed through genetic testing for horses. They do a similar thing for the human. They do a genetic test to determine if you are a carrier. And so there is some testing, but there is not like a true one-to-one. And there's not a ton of discussion around it. I personally have a belief that there is a significant amount of impact from a hypermobility. I think there is a spectrum of it in the horses from what I've seen working with client horses. But there's just not really like a diagnosable option for it yet, and there's not tests and stuff for it yet.
But sometimes I feel like I look at a horse and I'm like, I think it looks kind of hypermobile to me. But I mean,
I see it a lot in the where I get worried about it at least and see most of the symptoms. It's like the young dressage horses because and part of that is like, okay, there's a big discussion around like ECVM and like a lack of vertebral body stability in the neck. Is that also giving some hypermobility signs as well? Is it giving neuroscience as well? Maybe. I don't know. It's all together at this point in the body that I don't know if one is the primary cause, but I think that there is a population of horses that are, whether it's in the breeding or not, very mobile, and it takes them a lot longer to build the strength, but they might be so mobile that they look really flashy to do the job. And so it's challenging for people that own them that are maybe not versed in that as a potential. And so you can see the horse doing the movements. Maybe they're 5 and they can do a piaffe. Don't mean they're ready musculoskeletally to do that. So yes, they can do the movement, but they're not necessarily having the like large amount of strength training to be able to support that as a normal movement pattern. And so it's tricky because I end up seeing those horses when they're 12 or 13 because they've been joint sore. They've had a lot of overload in their body or their joints where we maybe needed to have them just in a longer strength program and doing more supportive work early on in their years that would help support the like a large amount of mobility. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one, but I definitely see some value in us thinking a little bit more about whether our horses are overly mobile and whether they have the strength to do the job that they're being asked to do.
Does it make you cringe a little bit inside when you see the pleasure horses with like the super flat knee?
There's a lot of things, but it's also like I see some horses that are overly extended at the knee and it's wild. And I just want to make sure that the rest of their limb is going to do the right thing and compensate appropriately. And I don't know if we have that necessarily in our training programs yet. Yes, they look flashy, but what are they going to look like in 10 years?
Yeah, it always makes me cringe a little bit because I'm like, if I ask somebody to do a jump squat and I ask them to land with straight knees, it's not going to go very well.
No.
That's going to put a lot of pressure in the joints.
Yeah.
I think of it as when you're landing, you're bending your legs to absorb the shock of the movement. And when you're landing straight, it's just going all right to the joint.
Yes.
So I always have to be like, oh gosh, when I see like, don't get me wrong, a real nice pleasure horse, but then they're like hyperextending at the joints. And sometimes I wonder, I'm like, are they hypermobile? Is that why they're able to extend out and land that way? It's just a question.
And it is a question, like it ends up being for those types of horses too, like their bones and joints will remodel accordingly. And so if they are always extending their limb, are they going to just remodel into a little bit more of that longer extensor tendons so that they are going to get to that position? And it's like chicken or the egg at that point. Like, did they start with a baseline mobility where they were really mobile because they were young, and then now they've remodeled? It is a challenge. I see that in like the reiners with those slide straps. They do the same, like they'll overbuckle, but then you look at the jumper world, and you can see horses that are over at the knees that can't fully straighten their limbs that are really great jumpers because all they do is bend their knees. So there is an inherent how much of it is training and how much of it is their baseline anatomy and how much of it is their like global anatomy. So if that's the only area that they're really stiff or they're really hypermobile in. Okay, well, that's probably like that localized. You sprained your ankle 5 million times, so you're not very stable there.
Mm-hmm.
But then if the whole body looks like that, then we have to think, okay, if they're landing like that and the rest of their joints are really mobile, then we have a bigger problem where you're going to have the whole limb be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they might pop up as only an extensor or a flexor tendon injury at some point, but like, what else is there? I feel like that this is just the one thing that's coming up on imaging.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy things to think about.
It's a complicated world.
It sure is. Do you have anything else to say about hypermobility?
I would say that if people are curious about it or wondering if they're on that spectrum, I would recommend checking in with the Brighton score system. So you can Google that. It's BEIGHTON. That scoring system. You can see if you're along that spectrum, which obviously that's not a diagnosis, but you can bring it into your primary care and say, hey, I have had some signs based on this factor, because that is one of the components to it. The other thing is that I'd chat with your primary care about it and see, are there things that are all exclusively hypermobility, or are there some additional things that maybe we do need to get some blood paneling or some hormone paneling? Do we need to talk about blood pressure changes or things like that? That could be telling us we have something else going on in addition to the hypermobility, because it is a diagnosis, but it's often a diagnosis that happens and is paired with another one. And I encourage people to look into talking to their primary care, but then also knowing there are resources with physical therapy, strength training. Strength training is obviously a huge component to managing symptoms related to it, as well as knowing that there are things like bracing, K-tape, additional things that you can do to help your performance in saddle. Because it doesn't have to be, you don't have to manage all the pain all the time. There's definitely things and tools we can do in today's day and age to help support athletes with this diagnosis for sure.
So earlier you were talking about if you're local to Portland, there's actually a clinic.
There is a clinic.
Too. Yes.
The clinic local to Portland is Good Health Physical Therapy. They are one of the leading clinics that manages hypermobility population and EDS population. They're amazing. They do some continuing ed. There's not necessarily like a specialty in physical therapy to work with people with hypermobility. It's a condition and a pathology a lot of us are well versed in as general physical therapists or sports physical therapists. But if you're doing continuing education for that population, so like as a physical therapist myself, I've done continuing education, and it's through some of those specific physical therapists are running those trainings, which is amazing. So it's something that if I have a client that is dealing with that diagnosis, I like to send them over there and get their insights and ideas as well, so that we can support the whole athlete. So that's Good Health Physical Therapy. They have a location here in downtown Portland, but they're our leaders in local, at least, hypermobility for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so if you didn't listen to anything in this podcast, I hope that you heard that you should strength train. That was kind of a theme.
Yeah.
And I hope for anybody else listening to this who's hypermobile, don't give up. Don't get annoyed at your body.
Yeah.
It is what it is. Just, do what you can, and, try not to hyperfixate on the things that you can't do. Focus on the things you can do. That's at least what I try to tell myself.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Michelle, for coming back on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Elevate Your Ride podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, follow us on social media, or leave a positive review. Please note, the views, ideas, and education shared on this podcast are intended for general education, and you should always consult with your team before making any big changes.